start. And and there's Cecile. Good morning. What we're going to be talking about this morning is what most addicts don't want to talk about, but we must.
Recording in progress.
We must talk about it because it's part of the disease, and that's relapse. The reason that the American Medical Association deemed alcoholism drug addiction a disease is because it does have that relapse component. Every disease has a relapse component, and so it is true for addictions. Now, I will tell you, just because it can be common, it doesn't mean that it gives us permission to relapse. But a lot of people do. And then I have known people that have, 50 years of recovery that never relapsed. Myself, I have strung together some days, lots of days in recovery by the grace of God. But like Overeaters Anonymous, good morning, Vicki, but I was in OA from 1972 to 1985, and I stayed in relapse the entire time. I could get a little time and then I'd relapse, get a little time and relapse. So I want to kind of go through a little bit about relapse, and I've got some people on here that could tell you a lot more about it than I could. We've got some seasoned people on here. Now, where's Greg? And there's Loretta. Okay, well, all right, I just had to see if my little ones are accounted for. Okay, so there are warning signals for relapse. And a lot of times the family will see these warnings. The family will see the relapse coming before. Oh, good morning, there's Miss Kathy, good to see you. That the family can see the signs and symptoms before the addict ever picks up. And so I'm going to go over some signs and symptoms of relapse. And if you've been in our family weeks, you've heard these. But it doesn't, we never can get too well that we don't need to know about relapse. And one of the things that I want to say, and I was thinking about this because I'm going to be speaking down in Alexandria, Louisiana in a couple of weeks, and they want me to talk about all addictions, including process addictions. And this is what I've seen in the field all these years is people may get clean and sober in their primary disease, and we'll applaud them. That's wonderful to get clean and sober. And then die of another addiction. Addiction is addiction is addiction. It doesn't matter whether we drink it, smoke it, shoot it up, chew it, it's addiction. And so where I'm going to speak, they have asked me to speak on all addictions. And, and I think about the education that we have today that Bill W. didn't have. And that is, I was telling y'all the other day, when we got back from our trip and we went to Stepping Stones to Bill and Lois's home, and on his desk where he did a lot of his writing, there were cigarette burns all the way around his desk where he'd be smoking, put a cigarette down and leave it and it would burn down and burn part of the desk, and so Bill and Bob both died of complications from smoking. And but they didn't talk about it back then. All they wanted to do, and I'm not putting them down, do not hear that. Yes, let them smoke when they're first sober. And that's what, we did at the Serenity House where I was, I was program director there. But I would see the alcoholics, addicts come in, and of course they were smoking. And if they stayed long enough, they'd switch off to eating. And we had many of them, particularly if they stayed in halfway house where we, saw them frequently, a lot of them would put on massive amounts of weight. So what that is switching addictions. And in my belief, this is my belief, sobriety is being clean in every substance. Because we can be clean in one thing and die of another addiction. So, but early on, they didn't know this. And that's why, Bill, and we're grateful that they did come up with a way for healing for alcoholism and drug addiction, and they've, shared it with the rest of us. All right, some warning symptoms is the number one is quit doing what they're doing. My daughter, who she's given me permission to say, Kim, had a severe relapse 11 years ago. She would be on here, but she's fixing something on the swimming pool that she gave me permission to say. I said, what really brought it on? And what she said was, I quit doing what I needed to do to take care of myself. And what had happened was, and this is her story, but she letting me share it, is that we were doing a show, a docuseries, an 8-part docuseries for the OWN network. And we were busy, we were working day and night. And, and we would have 12-step meetings on the premise to teach clients how to teach the clients that we were working with how to have meetings. But anyway, it just wasn't our normal routine. And that's one of the things that's essential for addicts in recovery, is to keep a routine. Don't get out of your normal routine. And that's what Kim said that she did, is that she quit going to meetings, quit calling her sponsor. And that's what, I have never, ever talked to someone in relapse that said, well, I don't know what happened. I was going to a meeting a day. I was working the steps with my sponsor. I've never, and I was working with people. I've never heard them say that. What I've heard them say is usually the number one thing is, I got so busy. I had to get back to work and I didn't have time to go to meetings. So the formula for recovery is you don't take away one behavior without replacing it with another one. And that's what the 12-step program is. It is a replacement for a substance. Not only that, it's a way to live. It is absolutely a way to live. And so the warning symptoms are irregular 12-step meetings or aftercare attendance, or declaring, and I've heard people say this, well, I'll never use again. I am done. I'm never going to use. That's dangerous for an addict to say that. We don't know that. We don't know that we're not going to ever use again. We get a daily reprieve contingent on being in fit spiritual condition. So we can't say, oh, I'll never use again, because we don't know. That's a setup. I'll never use again. And then another thing is people will quit learning, will quit, and they'll say, well, I've got the answers. I went to treatment, I learned how to stay, I've got the answers. And all treatment is, it just gets you to the starting gate. That is not the completion. That just gets you to the starting gate. It's what you do outside of treatment. You take those bag of tools that you learned in treatment, and you go out in the real world and you use it. So another thing is an addict tries to solve all their problems at one time. And I noticed this more when working in the drug alcohol field, with men especially. Most men, I've worked with lots of men. I enjoy working with men. Women, you get a bunch of women in treatment, and before long they're fussing and fighting over things, like they did as teenagers, hairbrushes or this or that or something else, or clothes. But men are, I think, easier to treat. But what I would, when I was at the drug alcohol treatment center, would have someone go out, maybe they'd done wonderful in treatment, had a good sponsor, had a lot of hope for them. We had given this little graduation and give them a good send-off. 90 days, 3 months later, 4 months later, they'd be back in detox. And I'd go back there, and that was before, folks, that I had any recovery from codependency. I mean, my clients loved me. They even called me mama or mother. After I went to treatment, they did not. They called me mother, because I came back with a little knowledge of codependency and realized I was loving my patients and my clients to death. But nevertheless, we'd have someone that we just knew was going to make it. 3 or 4 months later, they'd be back in detox, and I'd go down to detox and talk with them, and I'd say, what happened? What happened? The first thing majority of them would say is, well, I've been off work too long. I needed to get back to work. I needed to feed my family. And I didn't have time to go to meetings. That would be the number one thing. I had to work. I had to get back to meetings. And that's honorable, except they forgot that they had a disease. You must put treating any form of addiction or eating disorders, you got to put it first. You got to put recovery first. I remember my husband, when he passed away, he had 32 years of sobriety. And what would happen is, there's Karen Lee, my daughter. What would happen, I don't care what holiday we were celebrating, I don't care if it was my birthday, his birthday, the kid's birthday, Christmas Eve, whatever the holiday. He might be playing 42 or cards with the kids, or house might be full of company. And in a little while, I'd notice he'd go to his black overstuffed chair, and he'd pick up his big book out of a basket. And he'd say, y'all just continue, y'all just keep doing what you're doing, I'll be back. And he'd go to his meeting. I guess if the President of the United States had been sitting in our house, he'd say, give me an hour and a half. It takes me 15 minutes drive, 15 minutes back. I'll be back, hour and a half, 2 hours. Keep doing what you're doing. And he said, and I had said a good example, I'm bragging on myself, but I had to go to meetings. When I got into recovery, I had to go to meetings. Now, bless my heart, my family criticized me. My daughter's there smiling, yes you did. My kids got mad at me. My husband got mad at me because I was taking up too much time going to those meetings. But by the grace of God, I knew that I had to go. And this was Al-Anon. I wasn't even touching my eating disorder. This was Al-Anon. And I knew I had to go. And I've been in Al-Anon since October of 1968. And I knew I had to go. I had to go. For not only myself, but for my family, but mainly for my own sanity. So a lot of times the family's not on board. They don't like the change. But anyway, going back to these warnings, these are warning symptoms. They believe that there's only one solution to all problems. What that means is that they will try to get their sponsors involved in their finances or whatever, and then they'll be disappointed that those people in AA are letting them down. The 12-step program is for one thing. It's not for marriage counseling. It's not for money issues. It's not for any of that unless it's Debtors Anonymous. It is to help people stay clean and sober. And the way that you get help is you get a sponsor and you help them, allow them to help you. That's why the program works. So they try to solve all the problems by going to meetings, and they'll try to talk about the problems in meetings, in an AA meeting, and it's not appropriate. And so they will, the old timers, tradition people will say something about that's not appropriate to talk about in this, an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting. And a lot of times they'll get their feelings hurt or get mad and leave. Now, most old timers early on are very gentle with the newcomers, but this does happen. Okay, another thing is they'll try to just tackle everything at one time, everything, and then they just get overwhelmed. And so then they start saying, I'll just do it my way. Their way doesn't work, I'm gonna do it my way. I don't really need other people. I'm a loner. That's what they'll say early in recovery. I don't really like to go to those meetings because I really enjoy time by myself, just me and God. When you're hearing a young addict say that, they're headed for relapse. God lives and works through people. Okay, or they'll say things like, well, I just can't relate. I'm not like them. I am not like them. And what we say is stick around long enough and you're going to hear your story. You're going to hear somebody get up and tell your story. But early in sobriety and recovery, these are the warning symptoms of, well, I just can't relate to those people. They're all old, or they're all too young, or they're too rich, or they're too poor. They're not like me. And then they'll say something like, I'm not like them, and I don't even like those people. This is early symptoms of relapse. And then these are warning symptoms. And then the early symptoms is preoccupation with other things, overworks or underworks. Either extreme. They're either working all the time or they lay around at the house and don't work and then don't have the energy to even get up and go to meetings. They have too much structured time or unstructured time. It's this all or nothing behavior happens. Avoids communication with family or 12-step friends. These are the early symptoms. And stops calling sponsor. That is a big one. Doesn't stay in the here and now. They don't stay in the present. What they do is that they get back in the past and long for the past. Oh, there's Jenny. Good morning. They long for the past of how it used to be, and they miss their drinking buddies, or they miss their binge buddies. I'll tell you, when I came home from treatment for an eating disorder, I lost a lot of friends for a couple of years, and some of them never returned. And they were my binge buddies. And they, would call me smart aleck. They would call me they would just stay away from me because I wasn't doing the things that we had done before. I wasn't binging with them, and I went to meetings a lot. I went to meetings. I had to. I don't know about other people, but I had to. And this doesn't make me wonderful. It makes me willing to recover. I came back to a town where there was not one OA meeting, not one. So I drove to Fort Worth, Texas every Saturday morning for a year to an OA meeting. Then I helped start meetings in Abilene. At the end of that year, we had a meeting every day. So if there's not a meeting, start a meeting. A meeting is two people in a big book. You don't have to have 50 people there to consider it a meeting. Two people in a big book. Or show up, and if you're the only one there, read the big book. I've heard people that live in remote areas say that they would start meetings and no one would ever show up. But that hour they were not drinking or eating or whatever their addiction was. That 1 hour at least, they were in there reading the big book and waiting for someone to show up. So it is better, though, to have people in the meeting. And so then what happens is they don't stay in the here and now. They either get way back in the past and remember the times that they could drink successfully, or they'll get over in the future. And this happens to a lot of any form of addict. That, well, how can I go to a football game without drinking beer? I've heard clients say that. Well, or how do I go to that family reunion? They all drank. How am I going to go? And so, what you help them with, if you're a sponsor or you're a therapist, you help them get a plan. You get a plan and you work your plan. You go to that function, and if you get uncomfortable, it's okay to leave. You don't have to stay for the whole thing. But go in with a plan. But that's what starts happening. And, some self-pity comes in here because they remember how they could use. They don't stay in the here and now. And then they start having resentments. Well, their whole life, nothing is the same. And so they get resentful of people who can use. And the defenses resurface, whatever the defense is. And what that defense is what you use to keep people away from you. What's your wall? Those walls begin to come back up. And that wall can be a wall of anger. It can be a wall of silence. Mine was rage and my husband's was silence. I would rage, he'd get silent. That is a deadly combination. And the more silent he got, the more I raged. He went 30 days one time, and who was counting, but 30 days without speaking to me, without uttering a sound. He'd talk to the kids, the neighbors, pet the dog, pet the cat, ignore me, silence. Silence is what we call it silent violence. So a lot of times people in early recovery will get into that silent violence, or this is pre-relapse. These things, they haven't even relapsed yet. Okay, so a defense can be a wall of anger, a wall of silence. It can be a wall of talking. I've been around people who've treated people. In fact, she no longer lives in the area, but anyway, we had a therapist here years and years ago. She was the cutest thing and, had good credentials, but she could not stop talking. And I was going to get her a t-shirt saying, I'm talking and I can't shut up. So a lot of times, pre-relapse, people will get into, that's that wall, that over-talking. That's opposite of the silent. They'll just talk all the time, all of the time. Those defenses to keep people away from them. And, a wall of joking. You watch early in recovery when people start not wanting to go to meetings, they'll get into joking and, trying to cover up. Anyway, it's those walls of defense. And then they start envying people that can drink or use or eat like normies. They get to envying them. And then they get to where gratitude, they're no longer grateful. Gratitude diminishes. And then they start using the 12 steps selectively. They may kind of open the book occasionally, but they're not working the steps with a sponsor. Now this is the mid stage. They haven't even picked up yet, folks, and the family is usually seeing this before the addict ever sees it, is ever aware of it. And by the way, the family, we're hoping the family is in Al-Anon and getting their own help where they're not pointing out all of these signs and symptoms, but these are signs and symptoms of pre-relapse. So the mid stage blames others for their problems. Well, and my husband would say this, well, if I didn't have to live with that bitch, I wouldn't have to drink. You know, in other words, if I'd keep my mouth shut and not rage, he wouldn't have to drink. Well, if he didn't drink, I wouldn't have to rage. So we were just in there together. And then saying, you know, this is the stage where people start feeling sorry for themselves, get into that self-pity. Well, why does it always happen to me? You know, I was going to meetings, and then my work schedule changed, and now I can't get to meetings, and they start blessing their heart. Why does it always happen to me? And then another thing is they avoid having fun. They decide that life's not fun if they can't drink, and so they quit having fun. I'll tell you, there is nothing any more fun than to be around a bunch of sober people. We had built a big old playroom on our house that, well, really could have been a house freestanding. It had a sleeping loft. We detoxed a lot of people there years after because there wasn't any detox units in Abilene at that when my husband first sobered up. But anyway, the AAs would come out there and sober. But what we would do on Saturday night is after the Saturday night meeting, we would invite people out to our house. They'd play 42, they would play pool, they would tell stories or a few lies, you know, they'd laugh, they'd have fun, and so would the Al-Anons. And we would have a rule, I guess I had the rule, that the Al-Anons could not wait on the alcoholics. If the alcoholics wanted something, go get it. If you wanted something to eat, bring it, you know. The Al-Anons, you know, were not allowed to, you know, bring everything to eat and to drink and all that, you know, like soda pop or whatever. You know, early on in AA, the women, the wives, a lot of times would go with their husbands to the meetings. The husbands would be meeting in the living room, and the women would be, this was before Al-Anon, they'd be in the kitchen making coffee and baking cookies, and their husbands would be in there making fun of them and calling them the cookie baking bitches. That's what people in early recovery do. They slam you. So our rule at the house was the Al-Anons could not wait on anybody. And I'll tell you, I wasn't aware enough to do that. We had a out-of-town speaker, him and his wife came, and he spoke all over everywhere. So he was at one of those Saturday night parties. And I was hurrying around, you know, waiting on everyone, particularly my husband, and, you know, going back and forth. And I'd had 14 years of Al-Anon before my husband ever sobered up. But, you know, I was having a slip. But, you know, there's a fine line between being a host and being, you know, caretaking. And he pulled me to the side and he said, I want you to stop this. I said, stop what? He said, I want you to stop waiting on all the alcoholics, particularly those alcoholic women. Alcoholic women will wear you out and take advantage. She said, and of course later on I did become one of them, but anyway, he said, I want you to go in there and you sit out at one of those card tables and you start playing games. I did not like to play games. I like to work and wait on people. It was hard for me to sit out and actually socialize and play cards. And he said, if they want anything, they can go get it. And so so we started that to where the Al-Anon women didn't do we do our fair share, but it took everyone to, you know, bring something. And, you know, I quit, you know, baking for days, and that was before my recovery from my eating disorder too. So anyway, I'm getting off. All right, so what we're doing is the next thing is the next stage is this mid-stage symptoms. They blame everybody else for their problem. They become a reactor instead of taking action on their own behalf. A reactor is someone does something and a person in early beginning to get into early relapse will be a reacting machine. And they'll say things, why does it always happen to me? Avoids having fun, rationalizes, find sobriety miserable. When you find someone in recovery that they're miserable, they are headed, you can mark it down, they're headed for relapse. A 12-step program removes that being miserable. It is fun to go to meetings. If you want to find a group of people that are fun to be around, the big book talks about that. We insist on having fun. We insist on having fun. And there is nothing more fun. And of course, there is seriousness. But in a 12-step program, what will happen? People will tell a story about their recovery and maybe something bad that they've gone through, and people in the group will laugh or nod their heads because they understand they've been there too. They're not laughing at them, they're laughing with them. And then they'll tell a story about redemption of relationships with their children, or relationship with their parents, and we'll listen to that type of story, and we all start crying. We have empathy for each other because we can understand each other. And what happens when you stop going to meetings, you stop getting these things out of meetings. And so then they began to find sobriety miserable. They don't like sobriety. Open rejection to 12 steps and aftercare. Again, that was at the beginning. We repeat that because what happens when they start rejecting, those 12 steps don't really work for me. And really, I can pretty much do it myself. And then they get into fantasizing. Well, maybe I'm not an alcoholic. I made that decision was too quick. Maybe I can drink. And then they start isolating. That isolating is a big deal, isolates. And then they will go from isolating, loneliness is one of the biggest keys to relapse, early warning relapse, is loneliness. And in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, it says, deep in the heart of every alcoholic is that feeling of loneliness. And what does it say? 2 or 3 sentences or the next sentence. What we want to do is isolate and be by ourselves. We're contradictory people. We contradict ourselves. We're lonely, but we're not going to go to a meeting. We're not going to get out there and, meet people. We just stay at home, feel sorry for ourselves, and we isolate. And then we feel depressed, and then, just throw off our hands and say, well, what's the use? And so these next are advanced symptoms. Stop going to meetings altogether and aftercare. Changes in sleep patterns. They're either sleeping all the time or not sleeping at all, or sleeping sporadically. They begin to get critical of others, particularly family members. At this time, what they have one nerve left and everybody's getting on it. And then that extreme loneliness continues to set up. Plans began to fail. What they were going to do begins to fail. And they began to stop talking about their problems with people in the program. And then they convinced themselves, see, I'm really not an addict. And then, this is a big one, becomes secretive. And then all of this sets a person up to start using. Now, every one of these symptoms happen. They show up before the addict ever picks up. Whether it's food, alcohol, drugs, all of this happens before the addict ever picks up. A lot of times when I was working, would see them come in right out of detox. What they'd usually say is, well, I had to go back to work and I couldn't go to meetings. Or what they would usually say is, they didn't have the time. They didn't have the time to go to meetings. And so they'd start hanging out places, in order to recover, it's about changing playmates, playpens, and playthings. You can't keep hanging around the same people. that you used with. I was thinking about that this morning. I had some binge buddies in Al-Anon that we would go to Al-Anon meetings and then go out to eat and, binge together. And some of them could afford to do that. Some of them could afford to do it. I couldn't because I had an eating disorder. So when I came back from from treatment from California, and that's been 39 years ago. When I came back, it will be September the 19th, but when I came back, those people that I used to be my binge buddies, I couldn't hang out with them. And I'll tell you, some of my Al-Anon buddies got very angry at me. Some of my AA buddies, my women friends in AA, I mean, I had a big group of them, and they thought I had lost my ever-loving mind going to treatment for food. People didn't do that back then. I was made fun of, I was put down, and even my husband was. And we were kind of, we wasn't all of that and something else, but we were kind of Miss AA, Mr. AA. By that time, we were going around speaking, at Red Robins or, meetings or little conferences around the state. So, we, knew a lot of people. But when I came back from treatment for my eating disorder, I had to stop all of that. I had to stop going and talking in Al-Anon. I had to stop all of that for years, because it would have been like an active alcoholic going out talking in Al-Anon meetings. That would be it, because I was drunk on food like the alcoholic gets drunk on drugs. And so when I got clean and sober, and sobriety, true sobriety, is being free of any mind-altering chemical. And so when I got free of the food, people didn't like me very good. For one thing, I did stop raging. Well, I don't know, I didn't. I raged more for a while, the first year or two, because I had to keep doing other workshops. I had to work on the sexual abuse. I had to keep working, and people in my hometown, Abilene, thought I'd lost my mind, because I think that they thought that I was pretty well. I had put myself out there as a pretty healthy person. And I was in a lot of ways, but not around the food, And those of us with food addiction, we can lose the weight, and look pretty good while still practicing a deadly eating disorder. And so it fools people. I'd lost a lot of weight, but I also was practicing bulimia, and no one knew it. I didn't know it had a name. And so it confuses people. When I came back from treatment, I didn't weigh almost 300 pounds like I had years before. I'd lost the weight before I went to treatment. So losing the weight is not just, that's not the only answer. I went out, I was probably 20 pounds overweight, but I wasn't morbidly obese when I went to treatment. And the reason I wasn't is because I was practicing bulimia, another eating disorder. So I came back to a town that all of us were ignorant. We didn't know about eating disorders. And here I was pretty vocal out there about Al-Anon and AA, and worked at a treatment center, and people thought I was nuts. So it did help. It did help to go to Fort Worth every Saturday and get with recovering people. It did help that. And then, like I said, coming back here and started meetings. Okay, so all of these, the warning symptoms, the early symptoms, the mid-stage symptoms, and the advanced symptoms happen before a person ever picks up. This is what's going on. They're not even drinking or using yet. And the family can see it coming. And what happens is, if the family tries to say anything, well, then they'll just, the addict will get mad, tell them to mind their own business and all that. And so this is why the family needs their own recovery. they must have their own recovery. And so this is about, going to Al-Anon or CODA meetings for themselves. And relapse can come on quick, but every one of these symptoms usually show up. These are warning signs and symptoms of pre-relapse. And this is where the family can see it coming. They see the behavior change before the addict ever picks up. So, like I said, I was asking Kim, my daughter, she had that really hard relapse 11 years ago. And I had noticed, because she had been in recovery from anorexia, and so I had noticed her weight loss, but I had made a commitment to her, sitting in a therapist's office years before, not to say anything about her body or about her size. But we were doing that show for OWN Network, and it was on food addiction. And Kim was walking out front of me one morning, and I did a confrontation. Kim, when I see you losing weight, what I think or make up is I think you're back into your eating to anorexia, and I feel a lot of fear, pain, and anger. And what I would need or like for you to do is to look at the possibility that you're in relapse. And what I intend to do is go to a meeting and mind my own business. I'm going to call a sponsor. And what I request is that you reach out and get some help. So she did listen to the confrontation, and then she looked at me with a smirk on her face, and she said, "Get back in your own hula hoop, mother. Set your own boundaries, mind your own business." So that was my only indicator that she was in relapse. And she was in relapse from an eating disorder. But then everything, when you're a multi-addict, and when you relapse in one, it's like a domino effect. One goes and another one and another one. And she was into things that we had no idea she was into. Online gambling. I don't need, she did give me permission a while ago to mention this. But when the family starts, and she told me, she said, "Mother, that as mad as that made her, angry as it made her about me confronting her about her weight loss," she said it got her to thinking. And so we did, a month later, did an intervention on her. After we finished the OWN Network show, then we did, Karen, my daughter here, and a therapist out of Memphis came and helped us. We did an intervention on Kim, and she went to treatment up in Mexico and New Mexico. And I figured they'd keep her 45 days or so and send her home. She wound up going to a halfway house. She wound up living in New Mexico for 2 years. When you're multi-addicted, it takes time, one day at a time, to recover from all addiction. So thanks, Kim. She's out fixing the pool, but thank you for giving me permission to share that and just a little bit about your relapse. And it scared the whole family. That's the closest that we ever came to losing her. And what she was going to do was planning to kill herself. The day that we did the intervention, she had already planned on hanging herself in her house. So addictions are serious. Family addiction, family members who get as sick, if not sicker, than the addicts. But the good news is there's hope for all of us. There's a lot of hope for all of us. So with that, I'm going to close. And one of the things is HALT. We hear that all the time in 12-step programs. Don't get too hungry, angry, lonely, or tired. When that happens, that really can set people up for relapse. And so recovery looks like what we think is how we act. So when we start thinking relapse, but let's switch it. Let's think, when we think recovery, what we think is how we act. How we act becomes a habit, and that habit becomes our character or who we are. This is why I want to tell this one other little story, and then I want to turn it over to y'all. We had a beloved member of the fellowship that worked at an alcohol program, actually started the state alcohol drug program in the state of Texas. And he worked at Big Spring State Hospital. He worked with my mother many times. She was there 13 times. It never quite took with her. But he was a member of the fellowship, had 25 years of recovery. And he was a speaker at, he'd go around to different places in the state. He was good at what he did. And he, where he was at Big Spring State Hospital, they treated mentally ill, but they also started treating drug addicts and alcoholics. And he got caught up in that system and of working because they were on to something about treating alcoholics in treatment. This was years ago. And what happened for him is, they take away, they search people, when you go into treatment, they search everything. They take any drug away from you that you might have. And he ran across one, and he normally did not go through people's belongings, but he got busy and there wasn't a tech there. This is his story later. And he went through the suitcase himself and he found some black mollies. And you old timers probably know what black mollies are, but they're strong sedatives. And he took them. He didn't put them in the envelope and put them in the safe where they usually, for some reason or other, he said he took them with him. And that was his downfall. He started using again and immediately was back into not only the drugs, prescription drugs, but back into alcoholism, lost his job, and then he lost his life. And he had 25 years of sobriety. But this is where overwork, and this is where people in the field who, what we are called double hatters, we cannot get our recovery from working with our clients. We cannot do that. Our recovery is separate and apart from what we do in a treatment center or as therapists, and we have to make that very, very clear. It feels good to work with people and see them recover, and we rejoice with them, but that cannot be part of our recovery. Our recovery is separate and apart from what our vocation is. Okay, that's what I have. Who would like to say something about relapse? Because I know some of you have done a little research. You know a little bit about relapse. Anyone want to share about relapse?
Recording